Ed and Natasha. I am so excited to talk to you on the Allsorts Podcast. Your wildly wonderful reputation precedes you.
Really? Oh, fantastic.
That's
Thank you.
very kind of you to say.
Yeah, it's, we're not very far apart for people who are not from this part of the world. Whistler is about a 90-minute drive from Vancouver, where I live, but I surprisingly don't get up there as often as I might expect.
I guess you're not a skier or a mountain biker then.
I am firmly neither. My family is both. So
It's funny.
I'm the person who stays home while they're adventuring, like curled up by the fire.
There you go, folks. Not all Canadians ski.
Yeah, some of our, I would say 50% easily of our customers are from Vancouver. Some of the, our customers from 10 kilometers away in the other side of Whistler don't come to us as often as some of our customers from Vancouver. So we're very lucky. We have some diehard customers that, I would say they would just come to our bakery, but they're coming to ski or snowboard or mountain bike.
They say they come just for us, but they've usually got some sort of sports gear on that kind of gives it away. But it's nice of them to say that.
See, and I'm the person who would come just for you.
Aw, yay.
We're the same. We're pretty food focused. So if we want to hit up a new place, we'll make an excuse to go.
Yeah, and Whistler is such a special place. It's, just driving up there for the day, you not only feel a world away from the city, but there does feel like there's a really special energy and atmosphere there. People who love where they are, love what they're doing, and you're just so surrounded by incredible nature that it's hard not to be happy a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's true.
And our First Nation elders have told us that because we're on the shared territory of the Squamish and the Lil'wat nations, those two nations found Whistler as a common meeting place. And this land has always been sacred and a meeting place for people long before there was a ski town here. So, yeah, it's interesting that people that come here can feel that kind of sacredness and that feeling. And I think that's part of the draw to Whistler, that people just fall in love with the landscape and the energy and don't want to go back. Those mountains that surround us have seen so much that they witness everything.
Yeah. Well, and as one might guess from your accents, you also originally did not grow up in Whistler. So let's start at the very beginning with your story. How did the two of you meet?
Oh, that was a long time ago.
That was 20 years ago.
I was working in a kitchen in a city called Canterbury, which is quite famous within the UK, Canterbury Cathedral. Beautiful, small city. I was studying to be a chef and Natasha was at university, and we ended up working in the same small bar/restaurant. And I think we hit it off straight away.
It was interesting because he was in his third year of culinary studies, or going into his third year, and I was in between my second and third year of university, and I had to support myself through university. So I got a part-time job working as a waitress in a cocktail bar, and Ed was the chef in the kitchen, and he didn't talk to me for about 3 months because he said that with the high student population of Canterbury, there was a lot of staff turnover, and he'd got fed up of making friends with people and then them leaving. So he didn't talk to anyone for like their first 3 months. And then once I got through the first 3 months, we eventually went on a date in December of 2013. And so, yeah, we've basically been together ever since then. Really.
I was 18. I was a bit immature then, but
yeah,
not talking to people was a bit.
And I was 20, and I thought Ed was actually older than me when I met him because he looked older and he was a very good chef. And then when my friends discovered I was dating an 18-year-old, which was a shock to me as well, they told all my friends on campus, because British people are quite sarcastic and mean to each other as a sort of act of endearment. Canadians would never do this. They told everybody I was dating a 16-year-old. And then I had people coming up to me on the campus telling me that I was doing something wrong, that 16 was too young. And I went around, he's not 16, he's 18. And so, yeah, it was quite funny at first and a bit of a shock. But like Ed said to me at the time, there was nothing he could really do about his age. And anyway, I got over it in the end, clearly.
Well, and clearly the relationship lasted long enough that 2 years between adults is essentially nothing. It's all the same now. But it's funny how back then it does feel like
Huge.
a lot.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we just both had ideas of traveling the world and having these new experiences. And luckily, we both had the same sort of rough plan for the next few years once we finished our studies. And I worked at a Michelin star restaurant for a year. And then we decided to travel to Australia and New Zealand together. We were away for about 2.5 years. So we were both lucky with our careers that we could travel and still gain work experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also find my husband and I both got together very young. I was 20 and he was 23. And I think if you make it through your 20s together on the same path, I feel like that is a really strong indicator, because you change so much in your 20s, like if you can make it from, the early 20s to the end of your 20s and you're like, we've traveled. That's another thing that I find with relationships. You travel together and you're like, oh no, this person is not for me. So it's like, you make it out the other side and you're like, oh no, we're meant to be together.
Totally. Especially in certain scenarios, like when we were in Australia and New Zealand, it's very much like back home, but just different accents. But the people, it's Western culture is very similar. But I found when we were in Southeast Asia and India, places that you've got to think on your feet a bit more, you kind of depend on each other and you have to support each other. So like you said, it just builds a stronger relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And how did you find yourself in Whistler, like traveling all throughout? So Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, and then Whistler. Like, how did you find yourself there?
When we were in Australia, a really good friend of mine from college was in Whistler. So at the same time we were in Australia, he was here. And he just spoke so highly of it. He said it's a fun place. So once we came back from our first lot of travels, we were actually back in the UK for 5 years. And we always had itchy feet. We were like, we need to do some more traveling before, we settle down. And we landed on Whistler. We were like, our friend Tim always spoke so highly. We want to go do some snowboarding. So we were like, we'll take a year out. And it's the classic Whistler story. We'll come to Whistler for 6 months. And then I'm classically French trained. So we were going to go to Montreal for the second sort of 6 months.
And I wanted to learn French.
Yeah, so it was the perfect year out. And then we'll come back and carry on with our careers. And then, 10 years later, we're still here.
It was funny, though, because we didn't know much about Whistler at all. We just knew that Tim said it was good and there was good snowboarding. And we just kind of thought, right, we'll just get on a bus to Whistler, check it out. And if we don't like it, we'll leave. And when we first rolled into Whistler Village on the bus, the Greyhound bus, I remember looking at all the flower beds and the entrance to Whistler. It reminded me of like a retirement village. And I remember thinking because it's so kind of properly pruned and kept. And I remember thinking is this actually the right place where Tim had this crazy good time? And I was kind of okay, let's check this place out then, see how this goes. But obviously there are many sides to Whistler, and there's the nature, there's the partying if you're into that. There's all the extreme sports. And so, there's kind of something up here for everyone. So I soon saw Whistler differently, but I remember first coming in on the bus and looking around and thinking it was maybe not the place that we would want to settle for the rest of our lives.
I know it does have this very manicured, stately, when you drive into it and then you get into the village and the crush of people, or I presume, because I have never been to the tops of the mountains, it would just be a completely different experience. And there is so much, I'm a big hiker. And so going up there, being in the trails and being in the mountains just makes you feel so good.
Totally. And it's like you said, it's a perfect location for us as well, being from England. We can get to Vancouver so quickly to go out to the restaurants and enjoy the city, but then also fly back to the UK relatively easy compared to Australia. So it's not somewhere like Revelstoke or somewhere else in BC where you have to travel so far to be able to fly internationally or get around.
Yeah, I know. I almost feel like we shouldn't be giving all these secrets away and saying, like Whistler's, it's okay. There's better places. Like maybe
Yeah,
maybe don't
totally.
everybody come all at once to Whistler.
Yeah.
And come to the bakery.
Yes, come to the bakery, which we've got to talk about. So, Ed, because you spent, the first part of your career in, as a cook in these kitchens, like when did bread actually steal your heart?
So, like I said previously, when we came back from our 2.5 years away, we moved back to the UK, and we actually moved to Bristol, which is in the southwest of the UK. And I started working back in fine dining kitchens, 5-star hotel, and was sort of seeing some bread going on. But then I moved to into Bristol, into a bistro, well-known sort of farm-to-table bistro, and we just started making the bread there. Me and the head chef pretty much experimenting. He was like, we make everything else in-house, let's start making the bread. And that was about 15 years ago. And I was hooked almost instantly. Like I'd made breads through college with commercial yeast and things like that within my training, but I'd never really knew much about sourdough. I loved fermentation. I'd done sort of kimchi and sauerkraut and things like that in the past, made a bit of beer with my dad. But I was hooked straight away. Like I was mesmerized, and I still kind of am, about like how you can make bread with just flour, water and salt. Just from the bacteria and in the air and on our hands and things like that. So it got me straight away, not to the point that I wanted to stop being a chef, but as a new sort of part of food that I hadn't experienced before.
When I love ferment. I think there's something about fermentation that just feels, and clearly it's not magical. We know how it works, but it does feel a little bit like magic. How, a couple of ingredients and then you just let it go. And like the universe turns it into something different.
Totally. Yeah, like you said, it's just time. Generally, like it's relatively simple in the grand scheme of things. A lot of it is just knowledge, time, and just being patient with it. And that's why I've said previously to other friends and people that follow us on Instagram, like why it blew up so much during the pandemic is because people had more time. So they were able to experiment and enjoy. And maybe not everyone's making it now, but I feel like there's been a bigger appreciation for sourdough bakers, and so it's a good thing that's come out of that.
Yeah, well, and it's so funny because I watched everyone through the pandemic making all this sourdough, and I absolutely understood it because I always loved the idea of making my own sourdough bread, but I've always traveled so much for work. I remember one time I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm finally going to do this, and I'm going to make my own starter from scratch. I'm not going to buy it. And I was like lovingly feeding it. And then I went on a 5-day business trip, like mid-process, and I came back and it was just destroyed. And I was like, this is not the life for me. But then when I was home,
you have to take it with you, Desiree, and you have to get a hotel with a kitchenette so you can feed it before and after all your meetings, because that's what we do when
She's talking from experience. Yeah,
we can only get hotel rooms that have kitchens, like service apartments, because we have to feed the starter. But it's funny because in 2014, after our first season in Whistler, we actually went to Vancouver Island and worked on farms for the summer.
Oh,
and that's really when Ed started to make sourdough in Canada. And we had this little trolley, like a little cart, that we would drag around with us with this bag of different flours and seeds and a mini digi scale and all of this equipment so Ed could make bread. And we would rock up at our different farm placements and they'd be like, this is the trailer that you're sleeping in. And we'd say, okay, do you have a fridge? And they'd say, a fridge? And they say, oh, no, we feed you in the farmhouse or whatever. I'm saying, okay. It's just that we've got our sourdough starter with us. And they, what, you bringing your sourdough starter? Yeah. And then we would actually make bread for the farmers. Ed would make a loaf of bread. And it was so idyllic. I remember one morning he had this like little bike that was on the farm, and he would cycle from the cabin to the farmhouse and give them a loaf of bread in the morning before we started work. So it was quite funny. They were kind of perplexed that any farm worker was traveling around with a sourdough starter. But
See, and
that's it.
having grown up on Vancouver Island, I was like, how would they even question that? Of course you travel with your own sourdough starter. That seems very normal for life on Vancouver.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we were
very,
in good company for sure.
it's very BC.
And then, Ed's bread started to become a thing. And I was reading somewhere about the very humble beginnings of your bread business when you were first like taking orders and talking to everybody through Facebook. Do you want to talk about how that got started?
Yeah, it was very organic, really. Natasha and I were, and still are, very into yoga. We have daily practices, but we were going to a studio run by our friend Tina. And I was just starting to make bread at the restaurant I was working at. Again, similar to how it was in Bristol, we made everything in-house. And I just said, look, I think we should start making our own sourdough. It means it's fresher. We can control how much we get rather than have a standing order with a bakery. And I was just experimenting on my days off and would trade sourdough for yoga classes, which Tina was very happy about. But what it meant was I was taking a warm loaf of bread to the yoga studio in the morning. She was obviously very grateful, would sit it aside, and during the whole yoga class, the other people there, our friends, would be smelling this warm loaf of bread. That was very distracting. So it sort of created a bit of a buzz at the yoga studio, and they were like, "Where can we buy this from you? Like, we can't trade you anything for it necessarily, but we would want to support you." And it sort of set off a bit of a light bulb for Natasha and I. And we were like, how can we do this as a little side hustle, basically a community-based business, never really to make huge amounts of money. I just enjoyed making sourdough for friends and people in the community. So I approached the restaurant Outer Bistro where I was the sous chef. We didn't open for lunch. So I said, can I use the kitchen, rent the kitchen in the morning, make the bread, put it in the fridge to ferment overnight, and then I'll do my usual shift. And they were like, well, it's not going to interfere with your work. Then we're happy to do it. So they were very supportive, and it started at 30 loaves, and it was all done on an honesty basis. People wouldn't prepay. They would just give me their name, and they would pick up between 7 a.m. and 11 a.m. So I would be there a couple of hours before, start baking batches of bread because it was just a small kitchen. And I remember being like so scared the first week. I've never made 30 bread. Probably the most I've made was 10 loaves in one go. So it was 30. Everyone turned up, and I had a brown book that I would be like, do you want to get some bread next week? And they were like, yeah, put my name down. And I'd each week would change what loaf it was. And it soon just slowly start building up. People would talk about it, and then I'd have 40 names, 50 names.
Facebook group as well.
A Facebook group, so people could message me and say, hey, can I add an extra loaf? No problem. So they, 2 to 3 loaves. Some women were buying 8 loaves and sharing them with friends. And very quickly, within a few months, we were up to 100 loaves and then 150 loaves. And it just became a point after a year and a half. We just grew out of the equipment. It was just me. I had sometimes Tash would help come to the restaurant and take the money and take orders while I was running around baking. And it was a combination of us thinking we've kind of outgrown this operation. And it's adding more and more hours because I was only able to mix 10 loaves at a time. So it was just becoming numerous batches back to back. And the restaurant kind of wanted their sous chef back. They were noticing that I was sort of, getting a bit of media attention, and they kind of gave me an ultimatum to either sort of go into business with them or close BReD down. And we just thought, this is the push that we need. The community were asking us to have it more often and open some sort of bakery or whatever. They just wanted it more than once a week.
They were quite aggressively saying, you need to open a bakery. I don't want to wait for this every Thursday. Or they'd get turned away because Ed couldn't make any more. And if they didn't get their name down, they'd be off the list and they wouldn't be able to get any. And they were just basically telling us, when are you going to open a bakery? And we were like, oh, okay, yeah, we better open a bakery.
We better do this, yeah.
And then we were in our minds, we were like, we're going to open a bakery, but it's going to have to be vegan because we're vegan, which they didn't know. And we said, okay, yeah, bakery. And we thought, at first we were a bit afraid, weren't we, that to actually publicise it too much as a vegan bakery, because we didn't want to turn any of our community off, because most people that aren't vegan don't realise that bread is inherently vegan. Like, they're all eating vegan food if they eat bread. Obviously, they can de-veganise it by putting other toppings on, but the bread itself is inherently vegan. And so we were like, well, if we've got community buy-in for the bread, I'm sure they'll buy and enjoy our other stuff that will just also happen to be vegan. But we've become a lot more comfortable with our veganism as well as a business.
I think that comes with reputation. Like, once you've sort of proven yourself,
yeah,
and the fact is we never sort of push it down people's throat. We're a plant-based bakery. Everyone eats plants, so everyone's welcome at our bakery. And that's always been our thing. We make everything fresh. Generally, if you come to our bakery, you'll get a warm loaf of bread, which isn't very common. Unfortunately, a lot of bakers bake through the night. And for me, you're getting a loaf of bread that's potentially 12 hours old, which is still very fresh. Mm. But for us, you're getting a bread that's come out the oven within the last hour or two. Sometimes our baguettes will go within 20 minutes of coming out the oven and we've sold out. So it's sort of keeping it fresh and keeping it just as good as its counterpart. We really take pride in creating the best products we can.
I want to touch on what you just said, Natasha, because I think there is, and like, as a dietitian, as a vegan, one of the things that I've come across recently is that labeling something as vegan will often dissuade someone who's not vegan from making that choice. So you could say vegan chocolate cake, and people will choose something else that doesn't say vegan, because I think people have this preconceived notion of what vegan is, whether or not it's too quote unquote healthy tasting or it's somehow lacking versus its non-vegan counterpart. And I think something that's so inspiring about the work that you're both doing with your bakery is going, look at this. This is incredible, delicious, the best of the best. And it's also vegan. Like, you're eating this delicious thing that just so happens to be vegan. And it really creates this opportunity to change hearts and minds about what vegan food looks like, because it's not all carob and tempeh, as much as both of those things are wonderful in their own right. It's dark chocolate and it's blueberries, and it is indulgent. Yeah, I think
that's right. I have a few things to say about that. And the first thing is that when we think about vegan food options, they tend to mainly be made by two different types of people. So they could be in a omnivorous restaurant, like a standard fare restaurant or bakery, what have you, that is making a vegan option because they feel like they have to. And they're not particularly passionate about veganism or vegan food. And I would even dare to say they don't really care if it tastes that good, because us poor vegans are just so grateful that we have something to eat. And we will just say, thank you so much for making a vegan option, and I want you to make more of them. So I'm going to give you a 5-star review anyway, even though it tasted like cardboard or whatever, because we just have to be so grateful that these other businesses are catering for us in some small way. So there's that. That's one of the problems with vegan food that's out there, is that the people that make it essentially don't care. And we would even go as far to say they don't even try it themselves. They make it, bake it, out it goes. Nobody's sitting there thinking about, is the balance of the sugar and salt, is that right? Or has it got enough texture? Or has it got enough, does it need to be baked a bit more? These are the questions that we're asking when we make our
It's
products.
a hard job, but someone has to
it's really hard.
taste
You have to taste it over and over again.
They have to have 75 of them just to be sure.
Just to be sure. So that's the one problem. And then the other camp of people, of course, are our friends, the beloved vegans that are so mission driven, that are out there like, I'm going to make loads of vegan food because everybody needs to eat vegan. God bless them. They've got no experience whatsoever in culinary art. And so they're vegan because they're on a mission. They've opened a vegan cafe because they're passionate about the movement, but they don't know enough about food and flavors. And so their stuff isn't always that good either. But of course, us vegans want to support them because we're on the mission with them. And so there's very few people who are making vegan food that tastes good. Very few and far between. And so I think the reason why people like our products is because we're vegan, we're on a mission, but Ed's got 20 years of fine dining experience under his belt. All he's ever done is food. And, we love food. And so we care a lot, and we do our best to make sure the products stand up to any other product that you might get somewhere else.
I also love food, and my biggest thing in describing what vegan food should and could be to people who are not vegan is I say, imagine your favorite meal, like whatever it is, like a steak or a cheese pizza or anything. All of those flavors, all of those textures you can enjoy can and should be gotten from plant things. Like we can pack it with umami. There can be creamy textures. There can be crunch. There can be all those things. Like vegan food doesn't and shouldn't have to be lacking. It's just that you need someone who knows how to create those flavors, how to create those textures, and has the same standards for vegan food that an omnivorous chef and an omnivorous eater has from like all the other stuff. And I think that's what's such a game changer.
Yeah, I think when I first went vegan, that was one of the things. It's funny you say that, like cream for me, when you eat cream, we used to put like a bit of cream. I can't remember what soup it was at the restaurant I was working at, or it was like some sort of creme fraiche. But I just remember thinking, as I was on my vegan journey, I was eating less and less dairy. I remember it just coating my mouth and just having that texture, but no real flavor. And then I remember trying like a macadamia nut cream or a cashew nut cream, with it simple, just a little bit of garlic, nutritional yeast, or just on its own. You got that same consistency, but you could taste the nuts within it. And I was like, this is just opening up another flavor profile to me. You're getting that texture, but wow, you're getting the added flavors as well. So it kind of re-energized me in my career. Like Tash said, I've been in kitchens for so long, trained in French cuisine, heavy on dairy, butter, animal products in general. So I had these training, but then I was like, found myself again, almost like relearning how to, like you said, like make a counterpart, make something that achieves the same texture or flavor, but actually can be better.
That's exactly it. And I want to shift specifically to vegan baking now, because particularly for me as a recipe developer, baking is not, I can make a muffin, I can make a cookie. I'm not like a capital B baker. So I'm always still just like a little bit intimidated by it. And yet most of the basic like flour, sugar, salt, like all of these are already naturally vegan. But the eggs and dairy piece needs some figuring out. So let's talk about substitutes. Like what are some of the vegan ingredients that you rely upon a lot for making your baking taste delicious?
It's funny you say that you're not a baker, because I kind of have a bit of that imposter syndrome where I'm kind of like, I don't really feel like a baker. I'm kind of like I've never trained in a proper professional bakery. I trained in like fine dining, Michelin star restaurants and pastry sections, but I'm kind of like, sometimes like when we open the bakery, Tasha's like, we can't just make bread. Like we're going to have to make cakes and cookies, the other things that people expect when they come to a bakery. And then I just went full like grandma mode and was taking like batches of cookies to the restaurant for the other staff, saying, can you try this chocolate cookie and rate it out of 10 for me? Because in like 4 months, I'm opening a bakery and I have to sell this stuff. And they were really good. All this, of course, you bring chocolate cookies to some, they'll be like, these are a bit too soft or these are a bit too sweet. So coming back to what you say, like alternatives, a lot of it is testing. There's not a whole bunch of information about it. And that's why we were lucky enough for Penguin to approach us and say, hey, there's a lot of vegan cookbooks out there, but there's not a whole bunch of vegan baking books. Like, there really isn't when you start looking for one, or there's just people with making cupcakes and scones. There's not one where it's like not super advanced, it's still approachable. So we kind of wanted to find somewhere in the middle where there was something for more advanced bakers, intermediate bakers, and something as an introduction to give people confidence, because that's what cooking is really. It's repetition, just learning as you go, and then making something nice and it giving you confidence. And you're like, oh, that turned out pretty good. I think I'll try another recipe from that book. So, I mean, there are alternatives for, like you said, for dairy, for eggs, but even sugar, we have to look at, does that have bone char in it? Like Coca-Cola isn't suitable for vegetarians, let alone vegans, because of the sugar that you use in the bone char, which isn't the same for all countries, but definitely here we have to make sure when we source our icing sugar, that we are making sure that it's a vegan sugar. When it comes to eggs, you have to look at what properties. So the egg as a whole egg, as a yolk, as a white, what are you trying to replace? Generally at the bakery, we use organic Canadian flaxseed as a whole egg replacement. One, because it's really sustainable. It's grown in Canada, so it's supporting the local economy. It's organic, and it's a seed that we can blend weekly, so it's really fresh, and mix that with plant-based milk, soy or oat milk, and make a whole egg consistency. Plus, it's high in omega-3 and 6, so it's actually healthy as well.
But without the cholesterol of eggs.
Yeah.
And it's probably more cost effective than using eggs. I mean, it depends how you get your eggs. If somebody's got backyard chickens, they probably think that they don't pay for their eggs. But some people would buy maybe very cheap battery farm eggs. But for those people that are buying like the free range organic, those come at such a premium. Mm-hmm. I don't know why anyone could be bothered to pay that much for eggs when you could just use flaxseed anyway.
But then we are using, other ingredients that are higher price, like our vegan butter is always going to be more than dairy butter.
Yeah.
So we sort of try and balance it. If we're saving on buying the flaxseed, we then have to pay more for our plant-based milk or for the vegan butter we're using, and they're only getting better and better, which is awesome to see. In the last 10 years there's just been more and more improvements, but we've got a lot of information in the cookbook about egg replacers. That's definitely the most challenging one, I would say.
I think for baking, soy milk is preferred for milk substitute because it has proteins in it that are more workable. Like you can actually glaze pastry with soy milk, and that has a similar protein to what you would find in an egg wash. So you can get a bit of a shine on your pastry items just by using like a spoonful of soy milk brushed on. So soy milk tends to be, but we actually use oat milk again because it's Canadian.
Mm-hmm. I love that you guys have already mentioned like a couple of my favorite things. So I typically use flax eggs, but I was so interested in the book that you do mix your ground flax with plant-based milk instead of just water. And I think you've forever changed how I make a flax egg now, which is really, really cool. Mm-hmm. And then also that you mentioned soy milk, because soy milk doesn't get enough good press, and people forget that in terms of all of the plant-based milks out there, naturally soy milk has the most protein. It has a fat to it. Like it nutritionally, but then also functionally, it behaves a lot more like dairy milk than people might expect.
Totally, which I was really surprised about as I got into more testing. I wanted to make a really nice cornbread recipe for the gluten-free chapter, and soy milk worked consistently the best for making buttermilk. All you have to do is add some lemon juice or apple cider vinegar, and it's magic. Literally in seconds, it thickens, curdles like buttermilk. Whereas other milks like oat milk and almond milk don't have the high protein in it, so they just don't work. I heard that pea milk works. It's hard to source, and I didn't have, when in our testing stages, didn't have as good outcome with it. But soy milk, it gets a bad rep because people, estrogen and all these sorts of things. I feel like it's just got a bad rep. But when you really dive into it, 90% or higher of the soy grown in the world is fed to cattle, to animals. And the stuff that we're generally using is a higher quality. A lot of the time it's organic if you source that. So, and it's actually, like you said, very nutritious for us to eat.
Yeah, I'm very pro soy. The science of soy foods is 100% positive across the board. It's so fascinating to me that this myth is so pervasive on the internet, but also amongst people who call themselves health professionals who are supposed to like understand the science. Like it's such an incredible, incredible food. So I'm glad you also like it for its function. Now, I want to talk a little bit because I already gave up my secret of being a little bit intimidated by sourdough. And it is really, the beating heart of your book. And I'm really grateful that you've offered such detailed instructions. There's a lot of beautiful pictures by Janice Nicolay. She shot the last two of my books too. She's so talented. But so what would you say to the person who might be like me, who's like, yeah, I can cook, I can bake some stuff. I'm still a little bit intimidated by sourdough. What would you say to them to say, like, come on, you've got to give it a try. Here's why.
We started the book at the beginning. There's like an introduction of obviously who we are and everything. But once you get into the book, the first thing is how to start a culture. It's only about 50% of the book that is sourdough. So if you want to get in and just start making some cakes and cookies and sort of feel out the book and then come back to the sourdough, you can do that. Or you can start, if you've got a little bit of experience with sourdough while you're waiting for your culture to, get better and feed it up and everything like that, then maybe you can dive into some of the other recipes. But we started with a really simple guide to grow your own sourdough culture, and not just grow it, then maintain it. So if you just want to make bread once a week, or if you want to make it twice a week, there's sort of instructions in there and a guide step by step to take you through that. So we tried to simplify it as much as possible. Tash isn't really a baker per se either. So a lot of the things, that was why it was so good writing the book with Tash, is that she could come at it not just from her teaching background of making sure the spelling is correct and all the grammar, but just to simplify it as well, to make sure that I wasn't just rambling on and make it as complex as possible. And with having Penguin involved as well, obviously they were able to edit down even more and have their support and their team as well. So I think the finished product is giving the reader the best opportunity possible to sort of stick with it. And that's actually one of the reasons we don't sell our sourdough culture at the bakery. We have occasionally people come in and ask if they can buy it. And for me, I'm like, you need the connection. You need to have grown it yourself, and for it to sort of be used to your bacteria in your hands. And if you want to keep it in the fridge once a week, it really becomes part of the baker.
You can make other things with the sourdough starter as well. You don't have to make bread. We have a zero waste chapter in the book, which has quite a few recipes for using sourdough discard, because obviously if you're feeding this culture every day and it keeps growing, then you're going to end up with too much to fit in the container. So a lot of people, if they're not making bread, they have to throw out some of this starter because it gets too big. A bit like when you have the scobies in the kombucha jar and you end up with about 10 of them and you have to find people to adopt them. It's kind of a similar thing. So you end up with too much starter, and you can make waffles, you can make crepes, pancakes, crumpets, if you know what crumpets are, kind of similar to an English muffin. And so we have some recipes, and those you would just do in a waffle press or in a pan. So you don't have to get stuck right into the bread loaves. You could just start making the culture and making these discard recipes and then build up to the bread. That's a great way to start because the discard recipes are absolutely delicious.
And I really love that you have the zero waste chapter in your book, because I think, at least from my perspective, as people who are trying to do better for animals, do better for the planet, like really thinking about how we waste food, how do we utilize, where does our food come from, but then also what is getting thrown out? Like that is good food that would otherwise
Mhm.
just go to waste when it could be in our bellies. So I really love that you sort of took that very sort of whole life approach to it by including that.
It's
Totally.
one of our core values at the bakery is that we are zero food waste. We strive to sell every item, every crumb. And if we don't, then it gets donated first to our staff or our neighbouring businesses. And then if there's a lot of things left over, which really isn't that often, to be quite honest, we will take the bread to our food bank, and we'll take, if we have treats left at the end of the day, we'll box them up. We take them to the hospital to give to the emergency services, because usually they've been inundated with skiers and mountain bikers coming in with broken bones,
Yeah,
and they
busy.
get really overworked, and they're always happy for a sugar fix from us. So nothing gets wasted at the bakery. And we have been told by business coaches before that we're mad. The industry standard for waste is 30%. So if you're going into like a sort of Starbucks or something and you're seeing loads of muffins and treats left at 6 o'clock in the evening, those are going to get thrown out. I mean, they might get sold the next day at a substandard quality. I don't know how good quality some of their stuff is anyway, because you don't know when it was baked. It's probably been in a freezer for 9 months. Who knows? But then a lot of that food will just go in the bin, because the consumer has been totally conditioned to expect convenience at all times, at all
Mm.
costs. You know, Amazon delivery, Prime, next day delivery. Like, that's the kind of mindset a lot of consumers have. And we found it quite a challenge to re educate our community to say, you know, if you come in the bakery at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and we've been open for 6 hours already, you probably won't get a loaf of bread. And if you do, lucky you, because we're not trying to have bread available to put in the bin.
Mhm.
We're trying to make as much as we can and sell as much as we can. But if that means cutting back the numbers a little bit because it's in the dead season between the skiing and the biking, we don't have as many visitors here. Our locals, they go off to Hawaii or Mexico for some sunshine. So at that time of year, yeah, we might cut back our numbers a bit because we don't want to be throwing food away, because it's a global problem. And the only way we can address it is by acknowledging it and changing our buying habits, our
Mhm.
consumer habits. And as a business, we feel that it's our duty to uphold those values and educate the public on this as well. So the zero food waste chapter was born out of that philosophy.
I love that so much. I'm so grateful for you to have this sort of like philosophy and put that out into the world, because I do think that there are so many things that when we're like, oh, well, we can just buy whatever we want whenever we want and have whatever we want whenever we want, we
Mhm.
rarely ask the question, why?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
is this a good thing?
Yeah.
Maybe should we be happy with a little bit less? Maybe should we be happy with things being a little slower,
Yeah.
a little bit more patient? And yeah, it's maybe the stage of age or life that I'm at, but I'm very much thinking about that so much, of just like wanting less and wanting to slow down and have a little bit less
Mhm.
and enjoy things more, like better quality, less stuff.
Totally. Yeah, it's quite refreshing when we get a customer come in late in the day and they're like, we don't have what they want, and they say, "Good for you."
Mm.
It's kind of like, whoa, you get it. And they're like, "I came for a loaf of bread. I'll just grab a cookie. You've got a cookie. Good for you. I'll come back tomorrow and get a loaf of bread." But I know it's a hospitality like worldwide thing. There's a new bakery that's just opened up in Edinburgh, and she's making incredible stuff. And we always have this thing. Sometimes people will come in on the other end of the spectrum and they'll say, just make more, because we've sold out at 3 o'clock. And she had a close sign on her A frame. She was like, sorry, sold out. And then in brackets, it just said, just make more. So I think that was she obviously gets it as well. So it's a blessing. Like, we get it. It's because they enjoy the product and they want, us to make more. But some people get it more than others.
Yeah, when you have what they want, like when somebody gets a fresh loaf of bread and it's still warm and they pick it up, like their happiness is off the charts. People like absolutely love it. Like in the morning, we're selling happiness, but in the afternoon, we're basically addressing tantrums, people stamping their feet,
Yeah.
throwing their hands up in the air, and it's so emotional, when they love it when they get it, but when they don't get it, oh my word. It can be, I've had to learn some key phrases to respond to people, so I don't get kind of like shut down by how sad they are that they didn't manage to get a loaf of bread. You know, my strategy tends to be over sympathize and go, oh, I'm so sorry. And I've trained the staff to do this as well, just to try and, like, you know, nurse people a little bit, and
a little bit of counselling
in the afternoons. It's
Which
a very
I feel like
emotional practice.
it is, and I feel like it's a very, like, sort of typical North American mindset, the like 24/7 convenience all of the time. But I also read somewhere that there was another North American mindset that caught you by surprise, which is our absolute love of cream cheese icing. And I second that, because if I eat a cinnamon bun and there's no cream cheese icing, I don't understand the point of the cinnamon bun.
It's just a vessel.
Yeah, it's like it's a vessel.
You get two schools of people, and it's a generalization to say it's Europeans versus North Americans, but because there's definitely been some Germans that have converted to the cream cheese, and there's also been some Canadians who have rejected the cream cheese. But as a generalization, we've just found that when we first started selling cinnamon buns, it didn't even occur to us to put frosting on. Just didn't. In Europe, you get like a cardamom knot, maybe from Sweden or somewhere, and that's how it comes. And then we started getting complaints and negative reviews. Be nice if they had some cream cheese frosting. And at first, I didn't even know what they were talking about. And we quickly got on board. And so now we offer it as a side. If you want it, you can have it. So we have to ask people, would you like any cream cheese frosting to go with your cinnamon bun? And the two responses are either, hell yeah, who would say no to that? Or, absolutely not. How disgusting. Why would I do that? And, you know, we've got it there. It's an option. You know, it's funny.
So you can please both sides. I'm wondering, like, are there any, because I've traveled quite a bit. I mean, you know, you said a cardamom knot. I love a cardamom knot. I would never expect cream cheese on a cardamom knot. But have you noticed any other major, particularly because Whistler attracts such an international clientele, have you noticed some major, like, sort of taste preference differences between us here in Canada versus perhaps European or, you know, like other like East Asian clientele who come in? Like, have you noticed certain people love certain things and other people are like, just what? I don't get this.
I found some of the people from, like, we had a Japanese pastry chef work with us for a while, and she commented that everything that she would try, she kept telling us to add more sugar. It wasn't sweet enough. So I do wonder if, and I haven't spent enough time in Asian bakeries to really comment from that point of view, but I did wonder if Asian pastries tend to be more sugar heavy, and ours, we actually don't like using too much sugar because we feel that it overpowers the flavour of the fruit and the grains, and we like to kind of taste the plants that are in there, not just sugar. So I don't know for sure, but I just remember she was had been a pastry chef for a long time, and it was never sweet enough for her.
One thing that stands out for me, it's not really baking, but it's within the cafe bakery that we have. But when we open, Natasha has experience working in cafes and front of house, as well as working as a teacher. And we were talking about the drinks list and the espresso and different things we would have on. And she loves, whenever we go anywhere, she'll always have like a golden latte or turmeric latte or something like this. And she was like, oh, we need to have a London fog on the menu. And I was like, what the hell is a London fog?
Nobody knows.
I've never heard of it in my life. And we're from England. And she was like, so it's Earl Grey tea, steamed milk, and vanilla syrup. And I was like, that sounds gross. Like, I was like, I love Earl Grey tea, but I'll just have it black. Like, I don't need any vanilla syrup in there. And it's one of our most popular drinks, like outside of the espresso menu. Canadians, North Americans love.
Well, no, I think the rumor is that it originated in Vancouver, but nobody's really sure exactly where or why it's called a London fog. Yeah, so we just have to tell people that, it's not a drink that we have in London.
But it's funny because literally just before this meeting, we were talking, we do a shortbread recipe that we put on in the springtime because it's a nice light biscuit. My mum's Scottish, so I'm half Scottish, so I love it. It's like such a simple biscuit. And then Tash was like, well, you could put Earl Grey tea in there.
Let's do a London fog
so I was like, we could do a London fog shortbread with vanilla extract, Earl Grey tea powder, infuse that in. So I think that's actually going on the menu this week. So we'll see. We'll keep you posted.
Amazing. I don't know what it is about Vancouver, because I guess we just like to make things and call it, after another place. Because if I'm not mistaken, the California roll was created here too.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe it's our humbleness. We in Vancouver never thought that if we called something Vancouver, people would know what Vancouver was or care about it. So we have to give it like a fancy exotic name, like London Fog or California Roll.
But then you've got the Nanaimo bar. Apparently that came from BC ferries. Somebody told me that they started rolling it out on the ferry and then it really took off. So
it is actually originated in Nanaimo, which is hilarious. So they just, went with it because, I don't think anyone outside of BC probably knows where Nanaimo is, but we're just going for it. They're going to be like, oh, this must be the style of the bar. I've never heard this name before. We're like, no, that's like an actual city on Vancouver Island. Okay, before we switch to the rapid fire questions, I want to ask you, because you are a family that works together, and I could not imagine working with my significant other. I think we would tear each other apart. So kudos to you. But then also, what have you found, living together, working together as a family? What has gone easier because you are partners in life and work, and what has been more challenging because you're partners in life and work?
I'll start. I think the secret to our relationship before is that everyone's like, you've been together for so long, 20 years this year. And it's mostly because the first half, we never saw each other. I was working as a chef, so predominantly afternoons, evenings, and Natasha was working as a teacher, mornings, early afternoons. So we were like ships in the night. But what it meant is when we were traveling or had a day off together, we really enjoyed our time together. So I rejected the idea of going into business together for years, because I always wanted a restaurant.
For a couple that didn't get on.
Yeah, I'd seen it go bad. I'd seen it in a negative way. But then my brother works with his wife, and they have a flooring company together in the UK. And they said it's hard. You talk about work all the time, but if you've both got your separate departments and you both know what you're doing, and you don't tread on each other's toes, and then there's other things that you come together on, you can make it work. And I think that's what we've done. I run back of house, and Natasha lets me sort of run day-to-day operations because I have more experience in food and beverage. But then what Natasha brings is something I definitely don't have, all the accounting, the sort of back of house stuff, admin, sending emails to hundreds of people and so many
human
hats.
Resources, sales, finance.
So we make it's definitely tricky sometimes.
I wouldn't get in the kitchen and work alongside Ed. That's just too much. It's better we have our own departments. Too many cooks spoil the broth, they say. So let him be the cook. He's the chef. He's the baker. And I take care of selling it and all the other business aspects.
And taste testing, obviously.
But it's interesting. I had originally, the book was just going to be Ed, but then I had to come in and do so much. I worked on the book as much as Ed did. And so that's why now it says Ed Tatton with Natasha Tatton, because he realised that it wouldn't really be fair for him to take all the credit for that book, because I had to do so much research, writing and editing as well. And all the dishes on all the photo shoots as well. It's not glamorous, people. Like running a bakery, there's a lot of getting your hands dirty, and writing a cookbook is no different. There's a lot of dishes that go on.
Janice actually took a beautiful photo of Tash in the dishwashing section.
Orange gloves on.
With her orange gloves on, giving some sort of women power sort of...
Looking like a boss.
Janice was amazing at that. She was the perfect photographer to work with us on this book.
Yeah, Janice is amazing. She's so talented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we love Janice. She's super cool as well. But running any cafe, bakery, restaurant, any food and beverage operation is incredibly hard work. That has been quite a shock to both of us, because we thought we worked hard before in our careers when we were paid by other people, but working for yourself and wanting to spread vegan food as far and wide as you can, you really need a lot of stamina for that. And we have a lot, and I credit that to our vegan diet.
I love it. We're like, yeah, of course, we're vegan. We got way more energy. No
That
problem.
is, I truly believe it. Like Tash kind of half joking, but I really believe that I'm very lucky Tash keeps us on quite a sort of, we do indulge and we eat sourdough every day in treats, but we have outside of that a very whole food diet and lots of grains and vegetables, fruits. And I truly believe we couldn't do the hours that we work and have the sort of, focus that we have. Like obviously we're mission driven, being a vegan business, that definitely gets us both out of bed in the morning and motivated. But yeah, the vegan diet definitely helps.
Well, and I think in terms of spreading the message of like the joyfulness and abundance of vegan baking, the beautiful book that the both of you have written will go a long, long way. For people who have never been to your wonderful bakery in Whistler, never even been to Whistler, now that they can make your treats at home, I think it's going to be really, really special.
And that's what we've done. We've just put everything we made up to that point of writing it. We put it all in there. And people said to us, like, "Well, you're sharing all your secrets." I'm like, yeah. Like, we want people to bake vegan. We want to show people that it's possible, inspire people. We can't franchise or open up locations all over the world, but the book can reach all over the world. So that's why we're really thankful to people like you, Desiree, for letting us share it on your platform here, because if people don't know about the book, they can't buy the book. And if they don't buy the book, they're not going to know how to make all these delicious things.
Exactly. And that would be a disaster. People need to know how to make all of these delicious things. Okay, this is the perfect time to switch into the rapid fire. We end every episode with the rapid fire questions. Nice little softball. Sometimes they take a little bit more thought. People are always like, oh, that was such a hard question. I was like, okay. But we'll start with something really, really simple. Sweet or savory? Natasha, you go first.
Sweet.
Didn't even have to think about it.
I just say savory.
He says that, but he loves sweet things.
I like all food, but I'll always go for it. For an example, if we go for brunch, Tash will always go for a sweet option, pancakes or waffles. I'll always go savory. And then I get to finish hers, what she can't eat.
Because then you get the dessert. That's perfect.
Exactly.
Okay. Your favorite thing to bake at home for yourselves?
Cookies. They don't tend to go wrong. Cakes, on the other hand,
I don't bake at home.
It's
like
horrible.
Now I don't bake at home because I have the bake. Like if I want to bake, I go to our bakery and it'll be a test bake, and I'll bring some home. Our kitchen is terrible.
we have a rental apartment, and the oven is not one that we would choose. And I tried to make Ed a birthday cake for his birthday, and I'm no kidding, I think the seal must have gone around the door because it sank before I'd even opened the oven door. And it was so embarrassing. And I had to leave it on the side just so he could see that I'd tried to make a cake. And he came home and I was like, look at this disaster. And it's so embarrassing. I'm like, we own a bakery and I can't even bake a cake. But I think it's because the seal must have shut and it hadn't got to the right temperature, no matter what the oven said. So yeah, we hate baking at home.
I do pizza. Generally, we have like sourdough pizza on a Sunday night. I guess that's kind of in baking.
Totally.
Just because you have the oven, you just go as high as possible. And
it can't sink because it's already flat.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that's the quote of the episode. It can't sink because it's already flat. Okay, your favorite vegan spots in Whistler, other than yours, of course.
Are there any? Like, to be brutally honest, part of the reason we opened this bakery here was because there weren't any vegan. There's one vegan cafe called Green Moustache, and they're fantastic. They're totally different to us. They do juices. They're salt, oil, sugar-free. They're gluten-free. They are on health level off the charts. But we are based at the gondola, so we focus on like having the skiers coming up for day trips.
It's quick fire. You can't
cinnamon buns, quick fire. There aren't any. We're more or less the only one, and Green Moustache. So we're waving the flag in the mountains.
I would say Highway Cafe in Pemberton. So it's not much further. Highway Cafe.
We love Highway.
Friends of ours. Incredible sandwiches, wraps, burgers. 100% vegan.
Made by vegans.
Yeah, their stuff is amazing. Again, family owned. So shout out to Highway Cafe.
Amazing. I'll put it in the show notes. The condiment or ingredient you can't live without.
This is so easy for me.
Mm.
It's mustard and then hot sauce. Mustard,
And like
English mustard.
like yellow regular mustard or like a Dijon?
Coleman's mustard.
It's different.
I get my mum to ship it to me from the UK.
It's stronger than yellow
It's
mustard.
really, really strong. Like makes your nose tingle a bit. And then since moving to Canada, now it's a whole array of different hot sauces. They're easy. I love condiments.
Yeah, me too. What about you, Natasha?
It's probably because I'm more sweet person. So it's probably coconut yogurt, like the Yoggu stuff from Vancouver. That's the only coconut yogurt.
It is the only coconut yogurt, I agree. We'll put that one in the show notes too. Okay, then final one. You have 20 minutes all to yourself, and you are not allowed to be productive. You cannot be productive at home. You cannot be productive at work. I love asking this. What do you do?
It's such a cliched answer, but I'd probably do a meditation or a yoga practice.
Not cliche at all. That's amazing.
Go for a walk or something like that.
Or a run. I do like running as well.
You do like run. I would watch Formula One highlights if it's only 20 minutes, so I can only get the highlights in. I love Formula One. It's so on a Sunday afternoon. They're on summer break at the moment, so they start this week. Yeah, I think it comes from my dad. Sunday afternoons, just relaxing, watching the high-speed racing.
And it feels, for some reason, it feels like so much more cultured than like American football Sundays. There's something about like F1 that feels a little bit fancy. I don't know, just from the outside. I was like, yeah, F1 just, it seems very cool and fancy to watch the races. Ed and Natasha, thank you so much for sharing your passion, your experience, your love of food with all of us. Every single person listening to this episode needs to get your incredible book. The photography is beautiful. There is something for everyone.
Thanks so much, Desiree. It's been really nice being on your show today.
Yeah, thanks so much. Been great to talk to someone so local as well.
Yeah, totally.